I was in the middle of sketching a new design, my fingers dancing across the paper, when my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Marcus, my mentor and boss, asking if I could come by his office. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he wanted to discuss the upcoming client pitch. I grabbed my things and headed over, feeling a mix of anticipation and excitement. Little did I know, my world was about to tip on its axis. "Evie, come in," Marcus said, waving me into his office. His usual warm smile was replaced by a furrowed brow, which immediately set me on edge. "I need to talk to you about something important." I sat down, my mind racing through possibilities. Had I messed up the presentation? Was the client backing out? Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "I got wind of something troubling," he began, choosing his words carefully. "It seems Graham's been interfering with our potential clients. Specifically, he discouraged the one you were working on." My heart stopped for a moment. Graham, my husband, the man I thought was my biggest supporter, was sabotaging me? I felt a mix of confusion and betrayal swirl inside me, threatening to spill over. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I was hoping he was mistaken, that there was some logical explanation. Marcus nodded grimly. "I confirmed it through a reliable source." "I thought you should know." I thanked Marcus, though my mind was already spinning with questions and doubts. As I walked out of his office, my heart pounded with each step. How could Graham do this to me? And why? When I got home, Graham was in the kitchen, casually scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. I dropped my bag harder than necessary, the noise echoing in the silence. "Hey," he greeted, looking up with that charming smile that now felt like a mask. "How was your day?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I talked to Marcus today. He mentioned something interesting." Graham's smile faltered, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. "Oh? What about?" I crossed my arms, trying to stay calm. "He said someone's been undermining my work, discouraging clients. Do you know anything about that?" His reaction was almost imperceptible, a slight tightening of his jaw, a quick glance away. "Evie, you know how competitive the industry is. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding." I shook my head, feeling a surge of anger. A misunderstanding? Marcus wouldn't bring it up unless he was sure. "Why would you do this, Graham?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture I knew meant he was stalling. "It's not what you think. I was just trying to protect you. I didn't want you to get in over your head." "Protect me?" I echoed, incredulous. "By sabotaging my career? That's not protection, Graham. That's control." His silence spoke volumes, and I realized this wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a pattern, a deeper insecurity that I hadn't seen before. As the truth settled over me, I felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. I walked away, leaving him standing in the kitchen, knowing this was just the beginning of a battle I hadn't anticipated. Question now was, how far would I go to reclaim my life and dreams? Family dinners are supposed to be a time for bonding, but tonight it felt more like walking into a lion's den. I arrived at Arthur and Graham's family home, carrying a bottle of wine and a heavy heart. Graham had insisted we attend, despite the tensions simmering between us since the confrontation. I knew he wanted to maintain appearances, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this dinner was going to be a disaster. Lila greeted me with a warm hug at the door, her presence a comforting anchor. "You okay?" she whispered, sensing my unease. I nodded, though my smile was tight. "Just trying to get through tonight." Inside, the dining room was set with Arthur's usual meticulousness, everything in its right place. Arthur was already seated, his eyes scanning the room with the authority of a man used to being in control. "Evie, good to see you," Arthur said, his voice as commanding as ever. "I hope you're keeping Graham on his toes." I forced a laugh, feeling Graham tense beside me. "I try my best." As we settled around the table, the conversation started innocuously enough. Work, weather, Sophie's latest school project. But it wasn't long before the undercurrents of tension began to surface. "So, Evie," Arthur said, turning his attention to me, "I heard about your recent project. Quite ambitious, isn't it?" I nodded, trying to keep my tone light. "Yes, it's a big opportunity. I'm really excited about it." Arthur's gaze flickered to Graham. "And how does Graham feel about all this? I imagine it must be challenging balancing both your careers." Graham shifted in his seat, his discomfort palpable. "We're managing," he said, his voice strained. Lila jumped in, her tone supportive. "Evie's always been great at juggling everything. She's got the talent and drive to make it work." Arthur's smile was thin, almost patronizing. "Well, it's important to remember the family comes first. A house needs a strong foundation after all." The implication hung in the air, and I felt my patience wearing thin. "I believe a strong foundation includes supporting each other's dreams," I said, my voice steady but firm. Graham shot me a look, a silent plea to let it go, but I was done tiptoeing around the issue. Conversation continued, but the air was charged with unspoken words and hidden agendas. As the evening wore on, the tension only grew. Graham's silence was deafening, and Arthur's subtle jabs at my career ambitions became harder to ignore. Finally, it was Lila who broke the stalemate. "Arthur, I think what Evie's doing is incredible," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We should be celebrating her achievements, not questioning them." Arthur chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "Ah, Lila, always the idealist." The dinner ended in an awkward silence, the weight of unspoken truths hanging over us. As we left, Graham and I barely exchanged a word, the car ride home filled with the hum of unresolved conflict. Later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Arthur's words had planted a seed of doubt, and Graham's silence only watered it. I knew I had to find a way to protect my dreams from being overshadowed by his insecurities and his father's expectations. Question was, how far was I willing to go to ensure my own success without losing myself in the process? I was back in Marcus's office, the air thick with tension. I had asked him to meet me again, my mind still reeling from the dinner at Arthur's. Marcus looked at me with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Evie, you look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders," he said gently. I took a deep breath, feeling the pressure of my decision pressing down on me. I need to know more about what Graham's been doing. I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this than just him being insecure. Marcus nodded, understanding the gravity of what I was asking. "I can help you find someone who can dig deeper," he offered, his voice steady and reassuring. I nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and heartbreak. "Thank you, Marcus. I just need to know the truth." As I left his office, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. How did things get so complicated? I thought back to when Graham and I first met, how supportive he seemed of my career. Now it felt like everything was unraveling. Later that evening, I found myself at Lila's place, seeking solace in her company. Sophie was playing in the living room, her laughter a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. Lila poured us both a glass of wine, settling next to me on the couch. "You look exhausted, Evie. What's going on?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. But Lila had a way of coaxing the truth out of me, her presence as comforting as ever. "I asked Marcus to help me find someone who can investigate Graham," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Lila's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and understanding. "Wow, that's a big step. Are you sure you're ready for what you might find?" I shrugged, feeling the weight of uncertainty. "I have to be. I can't keep living in this limbo, not knowing what's real and what's not." As we talked, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Marcus, letting me know he had arranged for a private investigator. My heart skipped a beat, both anxious and relieved. Lila squeezed my hand, her support unwavering. "Whatever happens, you've got me and Sophie. You're not alone in this." I smiled, grateful for her presence. But deep down, I knew this was a path I had to walk alone, at least for now. The The next few days were a blur of work and waiting. I threw myself into my designs, trying to distract myself from the looming investigation. But the tension between Graham and me was palpable, each interaction tinged with unspoken words and hidden resentments. Then, out of the blue, I received a call from the investigator. He had found something that made my heart drop into my stomach. "Evie, I think you should see this in person," he said, his tone serious. The next day, I met him at a small cafe, my nerves on edge. He handed me a folder, and as I opened it, the contents confirmed my worst fears. Graham had been in contact with Arthur about my project, discussing ways to delay it. But there was more: emails and messages suggesting Arthur had a hand in influencing Graham's decisions, steering him away from his own career path. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about Graham's insecurities. It was about Arthur's manipulative control over his son. It was a tangled web of deceit and ambition that went deeper than I ever imagined. I left the cafe, feeling a mix of anger and determination. This was no longer just about saving my career. It was about reclaiming my life from the shadows of manipulation and control. Path ahead was uncertain, but I knew I had to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I was sitting on Lila's porch, the evening air cool against my skin, when Sophie bounded up to me with her usual exuberance. Her presence was a welcome distraction from the turmoil swirling in my mind. "Aunt Evie, look what I drew," Sophie exclaimed, thrusting a colorful piece of paper into my hands. It was a picture of us planting flowers, a scene full of life and hope. "It's beautiful, Sophie," I said, my voice softening. "You're quite the artist." She beamed, her innocence a stark contrast to the chaos I was grappling with. As she ran off to play, Lila joined me, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "What's going on, Evie?" "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," she said, handing me a cup of tea. I sighed, knowing I couldn't keep this from her any longer. "I found out that Arthur has been pulling strings behind the scenes, influencing Graham's decisions. It's not just Graham's insecurities, it runs deeper." Lila's eyes widened, understanding dawning. "Wow, that's heavy. What are you going to do?" I shook my head, feeling the pressure of the decision looming over me. "I don't know. Part of me wants to confront Arthur, but I don't want to make things worse for Graham." Lila nodded, her support unwavering. "Whatever you decide, just know I'm here for you." As I left Lila's, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The revelation about Arthur had shifted everything. It wasn't just my marriage at stake, it was Graham's entire future. I had to confront Arthur, but I needed to be strategic. The next day, I found myself standing outside Arthur's office, my heart pounding in my chest. I had arranged a meeting under the guise of discussing family matters, but I knew it was more than that. Arthur greeted me with his usual authoritative demeanor, his office a reflection of his meticulous nature. "Evie, to what do I owe the pleasure?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wanted to talk about Graham. I've come across some information that concerns me." Arthur leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Oh? And what might that be?" I chose my words carefully, aware of the delicate balance I was walking. "I know you've been involved in some of Graham's career decisions. I think it's time we discuss the impact it's having on him and on us." Arthur's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something, defensiveness perhaps, crossing his face. "I only want what's best for my son. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions. But at what cost?" Countered, my resolve strengthening. "Graham's struggling, Arthur. He needs to find his own path, not one dictated by you." The silence stretched between us, charged with unspoken truths. Arthur's expression softened, just a fraction, but enough to suggest he was considering my words. "I'll think about what you've said," he finally replied, his voice measured. As I left his office, I felt a sense of empowerment but also uncertainty. I had taken a step, but the path ahead was still unclear. Would Arthur change his ways? Would Graham find the courage to stand up to his father? Back at home, I found Graham waiting, a mix of anxiety and hope in his eyes. "I heard you met with my father," he said, his voice tentative. I nodded, meeting his gaze. "I did. We need to start making decisions for ourselves, Graham. Not for anyone else." He sighed, a mix of relief and fear. "I know. It's just hard." I reached for his hand, a gesture of solidarity. "We'll figure it out. Together." In that moment, I realized revenge wasn't what I sought. It was about reclaiming control over our lives, forging a path that was truly ours. The journey was far from over, but I felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The decision to accept the design project in Paris had been both exhilarating and terrifying. Felt like a lifeline, a chance to break free from the tangled web of deceit and control that had ensnared my life. But as the departure date loomed closer, the reality of leaving everything behind weighed heavily on me. Graham and I were in the living room, the tension between us like a living thing. He paced back and forth, his agitation palpable. "So, you're really going to do it? Just leave everything behind?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and desperation. I hesitated, my heart aching at the hurt in his eyes. "I have to, Graham. I need this for myself. It's not just about the career, it's about finding who I am outside of all this." He stopped, his gaze piercing. "And what about us? What about everything we've built together?" I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. I can't keep sacrificing my dreams for something that's been built on lies and manipulation. Graham's silence was deafening, and I could feel the weight of his disappointment pressing down on me. But beneath it all, there was a flicker of understanding, a glimmer of the man I once knew. As if sensing the gravity of the moment, my phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Marcus, his timing uncanny. "Evie, I need to see you. There's something you should know before you make any decisions." I agreed to meet him, curiosity and dread gnawing at me. When I arrived at his office, Marcus looked more serious than I'd ever seen him. "Evie," he began, his tone grave, "I found out that Arthur has been trying to sabotage not just your career but Graham's as well. He's been manipulating things behind the scenes to keep Graham under his thumb." The revelation hit me like a tidal wave, the implications crashing over me. This wasn't just about my career anymore, it was about Graham's future, his autonomy. It was a betrayal that ran deeper than I'd imagined. Marcus continued, "I thought you should know before you make any decisions about Paris. This isn't just about you and Graham, it's about breaking free from Arthur's control." I nodded, my mind racing. The decision to leave had been about reclaiming my life, but now it felt like something more. It was about giving Graham the chance to find his own path, to stand up to his father and reclaim his own life. Back at home, I found Graham waiting, his expression a mix of hope and fear. "Marcus called," he said, his voice tentative. "He told me everything." I nodded, meeting his gaze. "Graham, I think it's time we both take a stand. This isn't just about my career, it's about us, about you finding your own way." He sighed, a mix of relief and determination. "I know. It's just, I don't know where to start." I reached for his hand, a gesture of solidarity. "We'll figure it out. Together." In that moment, I realized that revenge wasn't what I sought. It was about reclaiming control over our lives, forging a path that was truly ours. The journey was far from over, but I felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Returning from Paris, I felt like a different person. The city had breathed new life into me, its vibrant energy a stark contrast to the turmoil I had left behind. But as I stepped through the door of our home, the weight of reality settled back onto my shoulders. Graham was waiting, his expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. "Evie," he began, his voice tentative, "I've been thinking a lot while you were away." I nodded, setting my bags down, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. "And?" He took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine. "I want to try again, Evie. But this time on equal terms. No more secrets, no more manipulation." His words were like a balm to my wounded heart, but I couldn't ignore the shadow of doubt that lingered. Graham, I want to believe you. But things have to change. We can't go back to the way things were. He nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. I know. I want to prove to you that I can be the partner you need. As we talked, a sense of cautious optimism began to blossom. But just as I started to feel hopeful, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. It was a link to an article, a scathing piece about my project in Paris, filled with inaccuracies and thinly veiled attacks on my character. My heart sank as I realized the implications. Someone was still trying to sabotage me, to undermine everything I had worked for. I showed the article to Graham, my hands trembling with anger and fear. "This can't be happening," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Graham's expression darkened, a mix of anger and disbelief. "We need to find out who's behind this." The next few days were a blur of damage control and sleepless nights. I felt like I was fighting an invisible enemy, one step behind at every turn. My confidence wavered, doubts creeping in like a persistent shadow. One evening, as I sat in my studio, surrounded by sketches and fabric swatches, the weight of everything crashed down on me. I felt paralyzed, unable to see a way forward. Lila called, her voice a lifeline in the darkness. "Evie, you sound exhausted. What can I do to help?" I sighed, the words catching in my throat. "I don't know, Lila. It feels like everything's falling apart." She was silent for a moment, then said, "Remember why you started this journey. You have a gift, Evie. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Her words sparked something inside me, a flicker of the fire that had driven me from the beginning. But before I could respond, a knock at the door interrupted us. It was Graham, his expression troubled. "Evie, I think I know who's behind the article," he said, his voice laced with urgency. My heart skipped a beat, a mix of hope and dread. "Who?" He hesitated, then said, "I think it's Arthur. He's trying to maintain control to keep us in line." The revelation was like a punch to the gut, the betrayal deeper than I had imagined. But it also brought clarity. This was the final test, the ultimate challenge to everything I believed in. As I hung up with Lila, determination surged through me. I was at my lowest, but I refused to be defeated. It was time to confront Arthur, to reclaim my life and my dreams once and for all. Path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but I knew I had the strength to face it. Tension in the room was palpable as Graham and I stood in Arthur's study, the air thick with unspoken words and unresolved conflict. Arthur sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, his expression a mask of authority and control. "Evie, Graham," Arthur began, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of command. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" I glanced at Graham, who nodded, a silent signal that we were in this together. "Arthur, we need to talk about what's been happening," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions within me. Arthur raised an eyebrow, feigning ignorance. "I'm not sure what you mean." Graham stepped forward, his resolve clear. "We know about the article, Dad. We know you've been pulling strings, trying to control my career and sabotage Evie's." Arthur's eyes flickered with something, surprise, perhaps, or maybe disappointment. "I did what I thought was best for the family." "For the family or for you?" I countered, my heart pounding. "This isn't about us, Arthur. It's about your need to control everything." Arthur rose from his chair, his demeanor shifting from calm to defensive. "I've built this family, this legacy. I won't let it fall apart because of your reckless decisions." Graham shook his head, a mix of anger and sadness in his eyes. "Dad, I need to live my own life. I can't keep trying to meet your expectations." The room was silent, the weight of Graham's words hanging in the air. I could see the struggle in Arthur's eyes, the battle between his desire for control and the realization that he was losing his son. "You think you know better?" Arthur challenged, his voice rising. "You think you can just walk away from everything I've worked for?" Graham met his father's gaze, his voice steady and sure. "Yes, I do. And it's time for me to make my own choices, even if it means stepping away from your shadow." As the words left his mouth, I felt a shift in the room, a release of tension that had been building for years. Arthur's shoulders sagged, the fight leaving him as he realized the depth of what he had done. "And what about you, Evie?" Arthur asked, turning his attention to me. "What do you want?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my own journey. "I want to build a life that's true to who I am. I want to create without fear of being undermined. I want to love without conditions." Arthur's gaze softened, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. "I see," he said quietly, the fight gone from his voice. In that moment, I realized that revenge was never the answer. It was about justice, about reclaiming our lives from the shadows of manipulation and control. As Graham and I left Arthur's study, I felt a sense of closure, a release from the chains that had bound us. Confrontation had been intense, but it was also liberating. We had faced our greatest challenge and emerged stronger, ready to forge our own paths. As we stepped into the sunlight, I knew that the journey was far from over, but we were finally free to walk it on our own terms. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. I woke up to the soft purring of a stray cat I had adopted, a small symbol of the new life I was building. Its presence was comforting, a reminder of the simple joys that had been overshadowed by the chaos of the past few months. Graham and I had decided to part ways, a mutual understanding that we both needed space to grow and redefine ourselves. It was bittersweet, but there was a sense of peace in knowing we were making the right choice. I found myself at Lila's house, sipping coffee on the porch while Sophie played nearby. Her laughter filled the air, a sweet melody that reminded me of the importance of family and love. "You seem lighter," Lila observed, her eyes warm with understanding. I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. "I feel like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. It's not perfect, but it's real." Lila's hand reached out, giving mine a reassuring squeeze. "I'm proud of you, Evie. You've come a long way." Later that day, I met with Marcus at the design firm. He had been a constant source of support, and I was eager to share my new ideas with him. "Paris seems to have done wonders for you," Marcus remarked, his eyes twinkling with approval. "It has," I admitted, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "I'm ready to take on new challenges, to create without fear." As we discussed upcoming projects, I realized how much I had grown. The struggles I faced had shaped me, deepening my understanding of what truly mattered. In the weeks that followed, Graham and I maintained a cordial relationship, both of us focused on rebuilding our lives. He had decided to pursue teaching city planning, finding fulfillment in guiding others rather than competing. Our final conversation was brief but meaningful. "I'm glad we're both finding our paths," Graham said, his voice sincere. "Me too," I replied, a sense of closure settling over me. We both deserve to be happy. As the days turned into weeks, I found solace in my work and the simple pleasures of life. One afternoon, Sophie and I planted a garden together, our hands digging into the earth as we laughed and shared stories. "Look, Aunt Evie, we're planting seeds for the future," Sophie said, her eyes bright with excitement. Her words struck a chord, the metaphor not lost on me. We were indeed planting seeds, of hope, of renewal, of the enduring bonds that held us together. As I watched the garden grow, I reflected on my journey. The themes of revenge and justice had evolved into something more profound, a quest for authenticity and self-respect. I had learned to let go, to embrace change, and to find strength in vulnerability. And though some questions lingered, I was content with the uncertainty, knowing that life was a tapestry of both challenges and triumphs. As I stood there, surrounded by the vibrant colors of the garden, I felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude for the journey that had brought me here.